The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. You know, today I have some very interesting people on my show. In fact, I have a co-host who's worked with me so many different times, and he's just an amazing man, and his name is Michael Solomon. And I want to welcome Joel Segal to our show as well. Joel is always called a mensch. You know, I don't know if people know what that means, but I guess you are. Now, Joel, it is very interesting what you believe in. I want our audience to understand what you stand for, because people, you know, today it's a crazy world and a very chaotic world, and all the things that are going on are really outrageous. So tell the audience what you stand for and what you think.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be on your show, and that's a great question. I grew up in a very small Jewish community in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was very active in my temple and junior congregation, and really very serious about studying the Torah. And I try to live my Jewish values and values that my mother and my dad and my extended family taught me. But I really believe that we're only here for a very short period of time. So there should be, justice, equity, fairness for all people, that the basic needs of a human being must be met: housing, healthcare, employment, education, food. America is woefully far behind in those metrics. I believe in 100% cleanable energy. I also believe that people must take responsibility, however, and do, make the right choices. And so I do believe in, this idea of, you teach a person to fish, so to speak. I also believe that in love and compassion, empathy, but I really believe in movements and coalitions. And I'd say Dr. Martin Luther King, Gandhi are my and Congressman Conyers are my role models.
Okay, so Michael, you heard what he had to say about all these different subjects, and I'm sure that you have an opinion, and I want the audience to know about your opinion. And let's start with the greening of our society.
Well, the first thing I want to say to Joe is I grew up the same way, except it was about 1,500 miles apart. I was in Bronx, New York, and I grew up in the same type of neighborhood.
Oh, cool.
And you know what that's like. So
yes.
Yeah, when after my bar mitzvah when I was 13, Hebrew school in those days was like Little League. Once you majored, you were finished.
Right.
That was it. You never continued after that. But and as you stated that you believe in justice and everything else, I grew up watching Superman, so I believe in freedom in the American way and keeping the truth out there, which is what I like. And I to be honest with you, I hate this woke society. It is driving me up a wall. And I don't know how you feel, but I'm proud of the American flag. I'm proud of the American people. And at this point in my life, I wish I could be proud of the American government, but I'm having some doubts. I'm sure we all are. But anyway, getting back to your question, Susan, as far as I guess we're talking about global climate change. I look at it from two different values in two different areas. One, I happen to listen very carefully, and I've lectured on it, Joel. I don't know if practically all over the world. The last lecture I gave on global climate change was in Shanghai on a cruise ship, and I had about 250 people in the audience. They all stood there with their mouths hung open when I laid the truth out for them and the scientific principles. I don't know if you realize this, but back in the middle 90s, it was Al Gore who, during a CNN interview, said that he got his theory of global climate change after he read Michael Crichton's book, State of Fear, which to me was absolutely crazy, because if you remember, Crichton's book was fiction. And the difference between what Al Gore has been promoting out there and the difference with what science is promoting is something that I say is consensus science versus empirical science. And consensus science is you put three people in a room and you give them an idea and they say, yeah, you know what, that's possible. It's very good. You can happen. You put one scientist in a room who's got a principle who proved it, a guy like Archimedes, and you can't doubt that. But a consensus is just somebody's idea and they're throwing it out there. So one is a hypothesis and the other one is empirical. What I do is I dug into the empirical science and I found out things that just are unbelievable. First of all, the consensus, he said the science is settled, and that consensus is only 326 scientists. 31 scientists say he's wrong. Man can't cause global climate change. The Paris Climate Accord has nothing to do with climate. It has to do with environment, clean air, clean energy. And the United States has already surpassed what the requirements of the Paris Climate Accord are. So why are we going to be spending $1 trillion a year for the next 20 years to bail out the rest of the world? And China and India, the two largest polluters in the world, are exempt till 2035. And they can renew that for 15 more years. So what do we do with that? That's the question. How do we get people to read off the same pages?
Michael, you want to answer him, and I think it would be very important that you give your opinion as well. You heard what Michael said, and what do you think about that?
Well, I am glad he's from the Bronx because that's where my family's from, the Co-op City area. And I used to go to the Bronx from the time I was 5 years old until my 20s. And I thought the pizza was exceptional and the egg cream, by the way.
You couldn't get a better egg cream, you know that.
Yeah, you know, the hot dogs on the street, but, you know, I'm a big New Yorker fan. But so I've been one of the leaders of the, climate action movement. I've written legislation for the North Carolina General Assembly. I've written bills that got into the to the Congress. But I also work with Professor Michael Mann at Penn State, and I work with Professor Mark Jacobson. I'm currently drafting transition legislation. The science is settled. 13,000 scientists say that climate change, well, there is a root cause of climate change, which is it is definitely, man-made, human-made, but it's not that human beings control the climate. When you're burning fossil fuels, what it does is it exacerbates, global heating, and it's the exacerbation of the heating or the changing of the jet stream. So the science is settled. 13,000 scientists from the IPCC, and in fact, the latest report said very clearly, if we go past 1.5 degrees centigrade in warming or 2 degrees, it is irreversible. The good news is that since there is a consensus, even among the gas and oil companies, everybody knows it. Wall Street knows it. Congress knows it. It's what do we do? Because if you look at the flooding in Europe, China, I represent the Latino Farmers and Ranchers Trade Association in the Congress. I'm on calls with farmers and ranchers. They've run out of water in Central California, and people are hurting out there because you got to have water if you're going to feed, cattle, and if you're going to make sure that when you turn on your tap, water comes out of it. So we're in a very severe crisis, supercharged hurricanes, fires. So what I've been doing is working with this for the last, maybe I'd say 12 years. I'm executive director of a group called Action Mobilization Network. We're working on a federal bill to transition us as rapidly as possible to 100% clean, renewable energy. It has to be a just transition. You do not want workers from the gas, coal, and oil thrown out in the street. They need to have their benefits. They need to be retrained, and the first to be hired in a clean, renewable energy economy. But there also has to be a lot of funding, international funding, to make sure that the rest of the world can transition and be resilient. So we have to really jump on this now before it is too late. There's no planet B. It's everybody's responsibility. And by the way, climate change and energy is not political. It's not a Republican or Democrat. It's physics, science, and it's about saving our grandchildren and saving ourselves right now and saving indigenous communities. But we're going to run out of food and water if we don't get this straight.
Yeah, Michael, one of the things that he just said is that he is following the science. Now, you're listening to what he has to say.
I agree with that, but he's following consensus science. Consensus science is not empirical. It's a hypothesis. It's a theory. That's why they still call it the theory of global climate change. And to get into something that you mentioned, Joel, is that you talked about the fact that they're running out of water in California. Do you know that they were supposed to build a 2 trillion gallon reservoir 15 years ago, and the governor of California vetoed the bill and won't build it because they're concerned about 2 stinking little fish that are about 1 inch long that it's going to corrupt. So what did they do? They built pipes to take the runoff from the spring thaw, and they pipe it out into the Pacific Ocean. That's why they don't have any water out there. 30,000 almond trees died over the last 3 years because they refused to allow the farmers to irrigate their plants and their crops with water because there's 2 stinking little fish in this thing that are probably dead. They haven't seen them in 20 years. The same thing with the forest fires out there. I'm not touting Trump, but I know forest management. My dad was a farmer. The fact that they're leaving the dead leaves and the branches and everything else just sit in the forest floors and they're not cleaning it up is causing spontaneous combustion. You get one lightning strike and you're going to burn California down. That's the problem. Look what's going on right now. They've shut down Lake Tahoe. They're telling people to stay away. That's a glacial lake. That's cool up there in the summertime. I don't understand it because they don't want to have progression. We can solve this. The people who are making money in this country right now are buying water stocks. Southwestern water companies are making millions for stockholders, but they won't do it. They won't allow us to improve. And we're not talking about tearing up the landscape and ruining everything. I mean, the Alaskan pipeline years ago, everybody's, we're going to get rid of the caribou and everything else. There are more caribou around that pipeline now than there ever have been because the pipe is heated and there's more greenery growing. That's what's causing everything up there to be settled. So I don't know. California's got to wake up. And that's the part of the problem is they just don't want to allow progression.
Joel, do you have any thoughts about what he's saying? Because needless to say, it sounds the opposite of what you're thinking and what you believe. So give Michael your refute. Tell him what is right or what is wrong.
Sure. Michael, you're obviously extremely well read and you're keeping up with the climate trends. Yes, there is a lot of truth in what Michael is saying. The brush that you're talking about that serves as kindling, you're spot on with that. They need to bring out the Army Corps of Engineers or create some kind of a climate youth corps or a climate adult corps and put people. I'm a big believer in working. I started work at 15. I've been working, even severely physically challenged since I'm a young kid. And work is very good for people. And, we can put a lot of people to work doing what Michael just talked about, and that's cleaning up that underbrush. So that's point one. Point two, there's a lot of truth in what Michael is saying about elected officials, be they governors or city council members or state legislators, who should have known that there had to be very important changes in irrigation techniques and water usage. And Lester Brown, who I'm very close with, he's the world's preeminent scientist on water shortages and food scarcity. He told me that one of the biggest problems with the aquifers drying up was overpumping, antiquated irrigation, pipes. Nevertheless, if you have a warming of the environment and the ecosystem and less rain because the jet stream has changed, then that will impact the aquifer. So Michael has a lot of truth in what he's saying. It's a combination of climate change and lack of planning for how the climate change and overpumping would impact water systems. So now I'm actually organizing through Latino Farmers and Ranchers Trade Association. We have a big Congreso, a big conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm writing legislation which would call for an emergency summit at the White House and a special select committee from the White House to deal with drought, climate change, and its impact on food security and farmers. And we can't stick our heads in the sand. We're going to have to tackle these problems, efficaciously as soon as we can, take the politics out of it, and solve the problem. My background is law and public policy. When I studied in graduate school and law school public policy, no one said that's a Republican policy or a Democratic policy. Those are parties, okay? Yep. That has nothing to do with fixing a problem that can destroy civilization.
Yeah.
Well, the problem we've got, Joel, you know what the real problem is? To be honest with you, there is nothing you, me, or any corporation or any country or the entire population of this world can do to change the climate. We can get rid of we can go to zero carbon. You know what happens if we go to zero carbon in 20 years? Everything in this world dies because there'll be no carbon dioxide and there'll be no oxygen. How are you going to keep the world alive? And if we get rid of fossil fuels, nothing in this world will move, because fossil fuels are not only for burning and creating heat and energy and driving vehicles. We use fossil fuels for just about everything. They make rubber out of it. They make silicon. They make synthetic materials out of it for clothing, nylon, rayon. I mean, what are we going to do? We're going to walk around nude again like the cavemen? Well, how are we going to have cars on the road, whether they're electric or otherwise? It's just not going to happen. And the biggest problem, what people don't look at, is we can park every car and mandate that every person has to stop breathing, and there'll still be carbon dioxide in the world, and there's nothing we can do about it. Why? Because there's 152 active volcanoes in this world that are always erupting one way or the other. A single active volcano like the one that's erupting now in Iceland, for every 36 hours that erupts, it is like idling every single car in the world for the same amount of time, for 36 hours. You can't change carbon. It's there. It's part of what we do. In 1912, the Titanic sunk because it hit an iceberg that was floated down off of the Arctic in the North Sea because of climate change. Where were the SUVs in the factories in 1912? They weren't there. How did that iceberg break loose and float?
Yeah, let me respond to Michael's perspective. So the preeminent climate scientist, I think, in the world is my dear friend, Dr. Michael Mann from Penn State.
I've spoken with him, but I know his work.
Y'all should have him on. Let me tell you what Michael said on MSNBC, but reflecting the views of about 13,000 climate scientists. He said that we can't change right now the heating of the Earth's temperature, but we can't, stop completely climate change, but we can mitigate it to the maximum extent possible so it doesn't get to the point where it threatens our food, our water, our coast, and our own ability to survive. So what he's suggesting, and Professor Mark Jacobson, who I represent in Congress, not officially, but he's my friend and my colleague, but Mark has a plan to transition the United States and the rest of the world to 100% clean renewable energy in every energy sector, 80% in about 10 years, which is what Lester Brown and 13,000 scientists say that we must do. Now, what does that mean? That means that the combustion engine has to be made into an electric engine, and that's cars, boats, planes, trains, and the military. We can power our plants and homes through clean, renewable wind energy, solar energy with battery backup, which is all at scale and all, it's all technologically feasible. But Michael does raise a very important issue about, okay, well, what do you do with oil where you're making plastics? Okay, you can make something that is made of oil, and I am no expert, by the way, on oil and plastics. but you can't burn oil and coal and gas for energy. We have to, like right now, bring the best and the brightest together. I think at the White House and states, come up with a rapid 100% clean renewable energy transition plan. We also have to deal with agricultural emissions. We have to deal with waste dump. So the science is clear and the engineering is clear. We just have to have the political will to do that. That's why I presided over an unprecedented meeting of progressives from across the country, over 43 organizations and leaders, and we have started the National Justice Roundtable, so progressives will begin to speak in one voice. Now, when I say progressive, I didn't say leftist. Progressive means progress. It's nonpartisan. There are progressive Republicans and independents and Democrats. We cannot leave climate change up to the politicians. I worked in Congress for 13 years. I've lobbied there for 14. And I can tell you that has to come from we the people. If we're gonna save our planet, save our farmers, save our economy, save our way of life.
Let me say this. You know, the two of you were talking about some very, very scientific and very specific issues concerning climate change. But you know what? We have to worry about our youth, what they're thinking, what they're saying, what they're sharing with each other, because they're our new generation. And the fact of the matter is they don't listen to people like you, but how do we get them to understand what is important about this? Because it is a very vital and a very important subject. So I'd like to know, Michael, how do we get this across to our new generation? And same for you, Joel.
We got to start teaching them science and technology the way Joe and I learned it in school. Joe, remember Archimedes' theory? Not Archimedes' principle, okay? Well, I'm going to take Archimedes' principle. I'm going to say something right now, and I can prove this. If every piece of sea ice in the world melted in 24 hours, how much beachfront property do you think we would lose? The answer is 0, because of buoyancy and displacement. When you take an iceberg and it melts, it does not raise or lower the water. As a matter of fact, it lowers the water a little bit, because an ice is only 98.7% water. The rest is air. That's why it floats. If you take everything and you burn, our kids are not learning that. They're not learning science in school the way it is. Do you know why there's high tides in Miami are flooding the streets? Nobody wants to tell you this. Joel, you know why, what controls the tides in this world? It's the moon. We have 4 supermoons this year. The moon is now 34,000 miles closer to the Earth than it's ever been. So Al Gore gets on CNN, or he gets on Fox News, and he starts saying, I was down in Miami and I saw fish swimming in the streets. That's how bad the ice is melting. Has nothing to do with the ice. But what Al Gore is not telling you is that when there's low tide, you got to walk out 50 more feet to get to the water. The beaches are deeper and wider because the tides are being changed.
Michael, let me respond to that. So once again, there's 13,000 scientists from the IPCC, right? That are sent. I mean, they're tracking this on satellite computers. It's very, very accurate. When you have melting ice caps, like when the size of an ice cap, the size of Rhode Island, breaks up in Antarctica, then it does cause sea level rise. Now, I was just in Miami. I met with the mayor. They're building a seawall to protect not only Miami, but the suburbs. So
correct, absolutely correct. I agree with that. But they're building it because of the tides, and the tides are controlled by the moon.
No, the tides are controlled by the moon, but there's a difference between a tide and sea level increase. But all that being said, Michael, the reason why I like talking to you is because you understand civility, and we need to have the kind of conversation we're having right now. We have to have it across the nation, around the world, because if what Michael is saying, there's millions of people in America. Actually, Michael, you're pretty advanced though, but they share a lot of Michael's views. We have to have an intelligent, rational conversation based on love and logic, especially with our climate scientists, and engineers to really begin clearing things up so that when we do move forward, it is based on science and physics and not, any kind of ideology. Where I will fault Donald Trump is Donald Trump, in my opinion, did a disservice to this country and the world because he said climate change doesn't exist and he denied it. Now, if it was Biden or Obama, I fought Obama. Okay, I fought with Obama many times. It's not about the fact that Trump was a Republican in the White House. It's about the fact that as president of the United States, you are responsible for the well-being of this nation and the earth. And he got us behind 4 years. Now we've got to make up for that, not by pointing fingers at each other, but by saying, how are we going to solve this problem before it is too late? The reason why there are students and young people all around the world in the streets, in the suites, they fear that they will not have a future for themselves or their children. All they got to do is look at television right now, see the flooding in Europe, China, see the fires, see the water shortages and out west, the inability for farmers to grow crops. The heat, these heat waves are killing people. And indigenous populations are having to move from one part of the country to the other because they're running out of water or because of sea level rise. We've got to come together as one nation, one people, one global family, and get this addressed once and for all and take the politics out of it. And I like the fact that Michael is keeping it civil. And I appreciate that, Michael.
Yeah. Gentlemen, we're coming to the end of the show.
Let me just respond to that, Susan.
Go ahead.
Part of the problem, Joe, and I'm going to be honest with you, you mentioned the IPCC. Do you know they're lying to the world? And let me tell you why. They're basing their global temperature rises on something known as a Stevenson screen. You know what that is? The Stevenson screen is a temperature sensor. Do you know where the IPCC has placed their sensitive Stevenson screen, where they're measuring ground-based temperature? At the end of the runway at Leonardo da Vinci Airport in Rome, and airplanes are taking off, blasting their jet engines right into this temperature sensor. This is a fact. I have photographs of it. The U.S. government has placed temperature sensors in the macadam parking lot of the University of Arizona in Phoenix. They put it inside a chain link fence, and there's trucks and vehicles parked right alongside of it, blasting the heat. They also put one on the campus of UCLA, where they've got it sitting right underneath. This is the truth. I can show you the photos. I'd be glad to send them to you. Right underneath an air conditioning duct, blowing out hot air from an air conditioned compressor, blowing right into these sensors. And they're basing that. But NASA, from satellite photos and satellite temperature controls, is telling me that the temperature has actually dropped a half a degree over the last 11 years. Where is that coming from? How did the Arctic ice increase over 533,000 cubic miles of ice in the Arctic Ocean over the last 5 years? Where did that come from? It's not coming from warming. And you talk about the heat and all the droughts and everything else. Remember the dust bowls of the 20s? Where were all the vehicles on the roads then?
Well, I'd love to have you, Joel, answer him, but unfortunately, sure, we're at the end of the show, and I would like to invite both of you back to continue this conversation because it's a very important conversation. And there's so many other things, Joel, that you stand for and think about, and so does Michael. So with that said, thank you for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's really been a pleasure. And as I said before, come back and talk and debate and do whatever you think will educate and inform the people. That is what I think, and that is what I feel. Good night, gentlemen, and thank you very much for being on my show.